Welcome to the Untangling Web3 podcast, your go-to hub to learn insights and the latest developments in the wild and wonderful world of Web3. I'm Alec Burns.
And I'm Jack Davis. Tune in each week as we navigate and explore the rapidly emerging landscape of the Web3 technologies, projects, and ideas that are shaping the future of the internet.
We'll be talking to the best and brightest in the industry to keep uncovering insights,
so that hopefully we can all learn together on our journey to untangle Web3. Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. Hey Alec, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm very good. How are you today?
Yeah, very well. Feeling good. Excited for this week's one, as I always say. But this is another exciting topic. So how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice and sunny outside. How else would I want to spend my evenings rather than sitting inside talking about some interesting topics with you, Jack?
Yeah, I'm already excited for the winter, so I won't feel the sadness and remorse at doing this with you instead of being out in the world. So
yeah, which is tragic. As soon as you say winter, my mind goes to like crypto winter. Like that's where we're at right now. That's the first thing that comes up in my mind.
Yeah, I guess it is winter, and it's always winter somewhere, but definitely in crypto.
Or as Robert said, apocalypse. I think.
Yeah, that was super funny. I liked Robert's fairly scathing take on Web3. It was interesting. Yeah. So today we are broaching arguably the hottest topic in tech right now, and the one that has taken the wind out of the sails of Web3 in many ways. So we're talking about artificial intelligence. What do you have? Do you have any opening thoughts around artificial intelligence, Alec?
Oh, so many opening thoughts. I mean, the very fact that ChatGPT is like an integral part of this show. Like we use it heavily for a lot of the things we do, not just like the definitions and some of the explanations, but also some of the marketing pieces. We use ChatGPT. It's just so good at these things. But I use it day-to-day life. Like the amount of like applications I'm using it for, in work, out of work, like replying to my mom, sending birthday messages. So yeah, this is a huge topic, like you've just said. And I think Web3 was kind of maybe one of the buzzwords like a few years ago, and AI is, like you said, right now is a dominating buzzword in the kind of in the news and like normal outlets. And I think now we're starting to see a lot of overlap between how these things align, which I'm quite excited about, to be honest.
Well, I mean, we know your mum listens to the show, so I'm sure she'll be pleased to hear that it's not actually you writing the birthday cards. But yeah, I think this is fascinating, right? That we were both just able to drop in this term ChatGPT. And that's the kind of, it's a tech term that this time last year would have been like any other Web3 tech term where you'd have to go through and describe it and explain it, but it's become a household name literally overnight. Most people will already have an understanding of what that is because it's been all over the news. So it's a kind of a strange one in that regard. But why don't we just begin with winding the clock back a bit and looking at the bigger picture. So ChatGPT being an example of artificial intelligence or AI. So how would you define AI just in the simplest terms?
Oh, it's going to have to be the simplest terms because it's such a complicated field. I don't think I'm capable of anything more than the simplest terms. So AI is effectively, I would say, the kind of the simulation of human intelligence. It's how we kind of get or kind of help computers, or computers actually try and simulate human intelligence. So it's about how they learn, how they understand, how they can process, how they can kind of recognize patterns, solve problems, all these kind of make decisions. Basically, it's an artificial form of human intelligence, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's kind of when we say that, that's kind of also the goal. And I think people get quite scared when you say simulating human intelligence because there's a lot of debate around whether that will be truly possible. But it can approximate, I would say, in many ways, what human activities, like as we're seeing with ChatGPT, it can do a pretty damn good approximation of writing and verbal written communication now. And artificial intelligence is kind of the umbrella term for all these different types of activities that have been around for a long, long time, actually, where you're trying to get computers to do more complex tasks that would have historically been reserved for humans, but now we can automate with machines and computers.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you talked about the history there and how there's been like these two. Well, Web3 has kind of developed in isolation with artificial intelligence, and we're going to go into the history now. But artificial intelligence started so long ago; it's no wonder that they've developed in isolation. Because I think, well, maybe we should go into it right now. Where did artificial intelligence originate from?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been around for so long. So my kind of research around this took me to around the 1950s. That's kind of the earliest time I think artificial intelligence was talked about. But even to go one step further, when we talk about computers automating difficult tasks that humans would do, then you're going back to things like Alan Turing and if you've seen The Imitation Game, I'm sure you have. It's one of my favorite films.
Of course, and I love it. Like, it's just such a good film. Like, I knew that you'd love it as well. Definitely your type of film.
So that is a great example, because you actually see one of these machines, the one that Turing builds in that film. It's this massive mechanical machine, but it's kind of the earliest example of a modern computer. And that's kind of interesting as well, because he was using that computer to break ciphers, to decrypt messages that were being sent by the German high command. So even in the 1940s, that's kind of an intersection of Web3 and AI, right? Because it's cryptography and the early kernel of artificial intelligence was kind of interesting.
I hadn't even thought about that. Like, we're definitely going to come to it later about how cryptography can actually kind of apply guardrails to AI. And I think that is a really interesting insight that you've just had. We'll definitely need to go into it a bit later in the show. But yeah, you're totally right. Alan Turing's paper, what was it called? Something like computing machinery. And he introduced the concepts of machines that could simulate human intelligence. And this basically set the stage for AI, right? And I think a lot of people listening right now will be aware of the Turing test. He basically created this standard for how to define like a successful AI or computer systems. And it was quite simply put, it was, could someone distinguish the difference between a human and an AI in responses? So right now, if I was to ask Jack and ChatGPT a series of questions, would I be able to distinguish between who is human, who's not? Well, that would be quite difficult, because everyone knows Jack isn't that human anyway. But that's the whole premise of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of make one final point about the Imitation Game and Turing's work, it's interesting to see what was motivating this move to computer-based tasking, or trying to get computers to automate things, because they were trying to break codes that were being done by the Enigma machine. So it was a machine bringing capabilities to cryptography and being able to create highly secure messages that motivated the need for, well, we need computers to fight back. We needed to automate the task of decrypting them. But yeah, so that's the first kind of data point in AI in my mind. And then around 10, 12 years later, there was this famous conference, the Dartmouth Conference in 1956. And I think that's the first time that people started using the word or the term artificial intelligence to describe what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And then I think another cool event that happened maybe like a few years after that was there was this ELIZA program. Are you aware of this one, Jack? By someone called
actually not.
Joseph.
No. What's this?
So it was this guy called Joseph Weizenbaum, which I've almost definitely just butchered the pronunciation of. Yeah, butchered. MIT, and it was the first version of like a natural language processor, and it was capable of basically mimicking human responses. And they simulated a psychotherapist basically, and people would really struggle to kind of distinguish between the two. It's quite like a groundbreaking kind of first attempt at natural language processing. Obviously, to compare that now with where we're at with ChatGPT, it's come on leaps and bounds, but it's quite exciting to see they were thinking about this, 40, 50 years ago already.
Yeah, and what's that? The term you use there, the natural language processing. What's that referring to?
We're already going to get into the detail, right, of the different like subsets.
Why not?
Oh God! So natural language.
Just not at the detail level, but yeah, just like what is at the highest level? What's that term mean? Because it's one that is something that I've come across, but I don't fully understand. I don't think.
So it's just a subset. I mean, there's like lots of different types of artificial intelligence. You've got some types that just match patterns, so can very like take a lot of data and just start to find patterns. Like very simply, if I get a lot of different fruits, I could just give all the fruit to an artificial intelligence and it would say, some of these are looking red and circular, these might be tomatoes or something like that. Some of these are looking yellow and long, these might be bananas. So that's like a pattern recognition. Natural language is kind of, well, it's human language, and the patterns it's recognizing is kind of the association between responses and answers. So if I put some natural language prompts, ChatGPT will scour the internet and try and find the answers that are associated with the inputs, which is the question I put in. If I'm like, okay, I've got, you go.
Yeah, I just said that's like so it's like specifically text-based tasks. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So like if I ask a question like, oh, I've got these symptoms, what's wrong with me? It will scour the internet for the inputs, the processes that I've put in. Like, I've got a cold, I've got a high temperature. It will find all the different responses on the internet. And then, using mathematics, statistics, basically, it will come up with the most probable answer by correlating all of those prompts together.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense then. And then the other type that you were describing with the, recognizing this is an apple versus this might be an orange, that's a kind of different category to natural language processing that is like different type of pattern recognition that is more, you might call it computer vision sometimes, right? So being able to detect spatial visual patterns in data.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so I actually did a tiny bit of pattern recognition. We were working on this cool project around like, it was like pothole detection type stuff, and we did some investigation to you basically give it vast amounts of data sets and say, these are potholes, these aren't potholes. I want you to work out what the patterns are underlying that, and then test it out on some training data. And like it's really impressive. Like it's really impressive.
Okay. That's better than my current pothole detection system, which is my tires, which just go flat every few months when I drive through one.
We've got very ahead of ourselves, though. We were only in the 1960s.
We're in the weeds.
We're in the weeds.
Let's go back to the 60s and the 70s.
Okay. So I was just talking about that impressive ELIZA project, and that's where the term natural language processor came from. Yeah, that was quite an exciting step. And I think just after that, if I'm not mistaken, it seemed that there was a bit of a kind of a low tide in the AI development space. And I think they defined it from like the 1970s, the first AI winter, where there was a lot of optimism, a lot of expectations, but there was a lack of substantial process, and that led to a lot of decrease in the interest of AI funding. And a lot of AI was then kind of maybe channeled towards logistics, but medical diagnoses, like even then they saw like there was actually a lot of tangible use cases during this time period, just a lot less funding in the space.
Mm-hmm. So like in medical diagnosis, it's kind of, that would be trying to predict based on some certain risk factors, some data points about someone's health, it try and predict the likelihood of some condition, right?
So like I mean I have a friend she's a radiographer, shout out to her, and so they're using the AI in like scans for cancer and things like that. Is exactly the process I've just described. We have vast data sets of scans that we know in the end are cancerous, and scans that we know aren't cancerous. Maybe we don't know that in advance, but we can put all this data into like an AI, one of these pattern recognition AI models, and it will start to associate the patterns between the two and come up with like absolute like incredible stats, like incredibly kind of accurate predictions of whether a scan is cancerous or not cancerous, way in advance of a human. And they're using this now, and she's using this now, and there's like it's incredible. There's sometimes they don't even know, but they just know like they need to do more tests. Like, they can even filter, because AI can be so cheap to run once it's trained. You just put these scans through, and then it's like, okay, there's a 90% probability that this is cancerous, and then you just have more advanced, maybe human deep tests after that. But like I say, I mean, it makes so much sense in the medical space to be using AI right now, especially for the pattern recognition stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that you say like in the 70s there was an AI, the first big AI winter, and even though the applications and potential are so obvious based on what you're saying there, and for anyone who's in Web3 experiencing their first Web3 winter, AI have had way more. They've had, they've been having these peaks and troughs in interest and growth for a much longer time. So it speaks to the fact that you get these winters in different technologies, kind of part of the natural natural adoption cycle and progression cycle of technology in general, which is interesting to see, right?
And I think part of that AI winter kind of overlaps with, like, a lot of the aspects that we're talking about in Web3. It was that a lot of the data was siloed. There wasn't that much data that was widely available to these models, and we're seeing that the models, their success really is heavily based on the amount of data they have access to. And we're going to come to this later when we talk about how Web3 overlaps with AI and vice versa. But I think that was one of the main reasons why there was this kind of lack of progress, because it was really hard to access like lots and lots of data. And I think when we saw the renaissance of AI start to come back in like the early 2000s, it was because there was a lot more access to data, mainly because of Web2 companies, people accessing the internet and all this kind of stuff that we'll talk about a bit later. But just before we get to that, one other event that I did want to mention was just as they were coming out of the first AI winter, there was this IBM chess player computer, Deep Blue. Are you aware of this one, Jack?
Yeah, I remember this. This is one of those fabled kind of stories you hear about, isn't it, in AI?
Yeah, but I love it. It's so interesting. It's just iconic, right? And basically, IBM made this AI that could play chess and called Deep Blue, and they pitted it against this the world chess champion at the time, Garry Kasparov, and he lost. So the IBM AI won, and his quote after was, "Chess is over now. No, why would anyone want to play chess when an AI can just do it better than them?"
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, right? Because obviously that hasn't borne true as I think, like chess is about as big as it's ever been. It's a global game that everyone knows, and you have all these apps that you can play chess on now. And I think that is, again, to talk about technology in general, and similar to what we see in Web3. When these things come along, there's always some kind of reticence to, there's fear about what that might disrupt, and things that it might cause issues for. And quite rightly, it makes sense that people are kind of conservative in the sense of, what are we going to lose out, instead of seeing the potential benefits of it. And AI is a kind of good example of that, where so far the things that people were worried about in the 80s, 90s haven't quite come to fruition, but now lots of the beneficial applications are actually starting to come through.
Yeah. And I get that. I completely get it. It's an economic impact, right? And I think one of the things that's scary about AI is the rate of change. It's very difficult for someone to control. It's not mechanical. I mean, Moore's law, exponential increase and all this kind of stuff. But AI just seems even more exceptional than Moore's law. Mechanical advancements are slow. There's lots of testing, whereas AI just seems like it's going to advance at a completely unpredictable and uncontrollable rate. And the job market potentially could be completely affected instantly overnight by it, and governments won't be able to react in time. I think that's one of the fears that comes in. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're still in the early 2000s, I think. So what happened after? So we had this incident with Garry Kasparov. Decided to put AI back on the map, and I think in the early 2000s we were coming to this AI renaissance that we started to mention, and we actually got more and more usability. People started to kind of have AI more in their lives. One of the first instances that I was aware of an AI device in the world was the Roomba, that came out in 2002, and people were using these little automatic vacuum cleaners with a bit of AI intelligence around them to path plan around the rooms and stuff like that. And they were crazy. I remember when they first came out, I was like, my God, this is unbelievable. I feel like I'm in a film.
That would be an example of that kind of computer vision pattern recognition in the spatial world, right? So it would be, taking scans or sensing, using sensors to scan the environment, and then recognizing, I'm about to bump into a cat or a wall or something, and then changing action after that.
Yeah. So this is my area. My area used to be path planning and robotics and all this kind of stuff. So that's one aspect of it, the computer vision. I mean, Roombas didn't really have much computer vision in them. One of the main things was around path optimization. I've got a room. I know roughly what it looks like on a 2D map. How do I optimize how quickly I can clean this? And how do I get around people to make sure, I clean this section at this section, this section at this time, and maximize my output, which is to clean the room. So it's quite simple in that sense, because there's not many parameters. It's 2D, and it's very simple to get around. I've only got so much input I can do.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't know the deep technical workings of Roombas, but was there an element of it would learn every time you set it around the house? Would it learn to optimize every time it went? Or because that's a big part of AI, right? It's optimizing the performance of the algorithm that's doing the prediction every time you add more data, every time you use it.
So not so much the early ones, but now, yeah, definitely. It's a lot around like the effects. Like some of them can monitor how much dirt they're finding or how messy a room is and be like, okay, well, I know from previous experience that this part of the room is very messy after dinner, every day. So I'm going to really go to the kitchen after dinner every day because I know it's super messy there. It's simple things like that.
Oh, wow.
And like the new Roombas and cleaning devices, they log all that data. They know when to clean what parts of the room. And it's super exciting. We actually had a programmable Roomba in my old robotics lab, and like one of the things was how can you optimize like the path planning. It sounds really boring, tedious, but it's like a really fun way to learn these things.
Yeah, that's really cool. You'd never guess that there's so much going on inside them as well when they're just roving around.
This just looks so dumb, right?
Really
just
cool.
bumping into things constantly.
Yeah. It's like I always presumed it was just back in the day. I presumed it would bump into something and then it would just randomly pick a new direction and hope for the best. That's what it looked like. But yeah.
That's definitely there's this rule where it's like you bump into something. That was one of the first things we tested in the programmable Roombas that we did. It was like you just bump into something, and when you hit something, you turn right and then just go forward until you bump into something else. Like the turn right rule, we called it.
Okay, well, very, very ingenious naming convention you got there. So yeah, and then we're talking about the early 2000s, maybe kind of early 2010s as well. And I think that's, as you say, that's when we saw a lot of the first consumer applications of AI taking off, big companies adopting it. So like, Apple and Siri was probably the first time I realized I was going to say that's the first time I realized I was interacting with an AI, but then it just popped into my head. Was the Microsoft paperclip an AI, or was that? I wonder.
Surely not. Not old Clippy, whatever his name was.
Yeah, Clippy. I wonder if they had any machine learning algorithm in that. But something like Siri was the first time I really knew. Okay, this is something different. This is this computer in my phone is actively learning based on what I'm doing, which is kind of blew my mind a little bit.
I think that I'm pretty sure the Clippy wasn't like. I'll be corrected if someone can, but I think that even the early series, they were. I don't know if the AI was necessarily for the responses. I think it was more around the voice recognition. I think, which would make me think that the Clippy wasn't. Like, happy to be corrected on that. But obviously now it's around the responses, and there's a bit of AI and actually how they generate the response. But I thought it was more on the voice recognition. But yeah, I mean now they're like as an AI enabled as a lot of things are. But yeah, you are right. Yeah. There were some of the first like experiences that people had with AI, and they were everywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't appreciate that. Then it was more on the pattern recognition of your speech, whereas now I'm sure whatever the current iteration of Siri is will definitely be doing that plus a hell of a lot of predicting what you're doing. When you get I get all these pop-ups now saying, oh, do you want to use this app, or your app recommendations, based on the time of day or what you're doing. That's all the predictive AI rather than just pattern recognition.
Yeah. And I think on this like AI-enabled kind of voice recognition and improvements on voice recognition, we're going to come to this later. It's all about the data set. And when like the original series came out and the original voice recognitions came out, there were so many like regional dialects in the UK that just weren't covered. Like I just have so many memories of my granddad, who's from like the Black Country and has the thickest accent. Like I can barely understand him. I usually have to like translate what he's saying for my partners. And I remember him trying to use Siri, and it was just the funniest thing. He'd be playing like music that he'd never heard of when he'd be asking what the time was, and they'd just be having like full-blown conversations.
How do you think it was in Wales, man? It was triple struggle. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of like from the 2010s onwards, and maybe just to kind of summarize that decade and into where the current state. So we had this real deep learning revolution, and deep learning is a kind of subset of artificial intelligence. If artificial intelligence is the big umbrella term for all these types of things, then deep learning is the subset that is talking about what's called neural networks and using our best models for how the brain works. So you have all these neurons and connections between them, using what we understand of the brain to actually implement this artificial intelligence. And that's where we've seen, all the massive advances recently. But it's quite a different model, and it hasn't been around for quite as long.
Yeah, and there's lots. We're not going to go into. I think we'll have to have a separate episode, like just speaking about that specifically.
Yeah.
But there's lots of emphasis on like having these weighted nodes for how decisions are made and being able to fine tune things based on that. It's incredibly interesting. And I think like you're talking about like the deep learning aspect that really came to maybe fruition in the 2010s. Like a large part of this kind of this big bang basically in AI was also the massive data sets that we've talked on previous episodes about. Web2 companies kind of being these central bastions of vast amounts of data, and in part the success of AIs at this time in the early 2010s and whatnot was because of these huge data sets that they now had access to train these AI models, and that is one of the reasons why they're so successful to date, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to touch on that now as well, just as a point of kind of information, is the modern machine learning techniques and deep learning techniques are very, very dependent on data sets, because a lot of them are what's called supervised learning, where you have some model that like is mimicking the connections in the brain at a high level, and then what you do is you feed it data that you know is something. So you feed it a picture of an apple and you tell it this is an apple, but you see what it predicts and then compare its prediction to what you said. So maybe it says it's a plum tomato, and you go, well, it's not too far off, but it's pretty close. And then based on how far off that guess was, it will improve. And so it's dependent on the quality of the data you give it, how much data you give it,
exactly.
And then iterating it over time. That's kind of the model it uses.
Yeah, exactly. Say you have like 100 pictures of tomatoes and bananas. You take 20 of those pictures, put them to one side. That's the kind of the testing set that you use at the end. The 80% of the photos you have, you'll tell it what a banana is, what a tomato is, and it will try and learn basically. And then you'll test that success on the 20 tomato photos that you kept to the side or something like that. But you explained it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, and it has applications. This kind of model, this is used in a lot in finance as well, right? Because a lot of trading online now is algorithmic, and will use machine learning models, because you can train your model, your neural network, on all the historical data on the stock market, for example, and then you can predict the next year or day or month or whatever, and then as that data comes in, you not only see maybe I made a lot of money off the trades it told me to do, but you're continuously getting new data to improve the model as you go.
Is this how we become big? We start to advise people on trading, become crypto bro podcast.
No financial advice. Not that I've not been doing anything on the side.
Big disclaimer. But yeah, no, I get. This is one of the exciting things about AI is when you have a human and like the knowledge and training over the 20 years that makes them good at their job, they're there. But as soon as they leave the job, that knowledge to an extent is lost. But an AI just continually improving, continually learning, and you have like one of the exciting, sexy things about ChatGPT is there's like lots of parallel interfaces of people using ChatGPT, each asking questions, each inputting more data, and they're all collectively improving together because it's one central source of information that controls everything. And this is one of the powerful aspects of ChatGPT and these large language models, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what we've just seen now in late 2022 and early this year is you've had the culmination of years and years of research in the actual deep learning technology. I mean, funnily enough, the paper that spawned all of ChatGPT came out in 2017. So it even took 6 years from that to see what we've got now. But it combined that with obtaining these huge, vast data sets from the internet that you said. It's this model that was designed by Google in 2017 has been trained on essentially the internet, and is now being used for this to complete the story for this natural language processing and all these chatbot functionalities. And that's what really took off and started the conversation. And if you look at the venture capital market at the minute, virtually all the attention has gone away from Web3 and straight to AI because of the impact it's had in the last kind of 6 to 9 months.
I think you've bridged it nicely to the Web3 conversation. And I think there's one thing one of the reasons I think that has happened, that the kind of the focus has shifted from Web3 to this AI is in large part to ChatGPT. Like the technology, I've spoken to a lot of people in the space, and they're saying the technology hasn't changed that much. The actual model of ChatGPT isn't so different to a lot of the competitors. The thing that really changed and has really made this groundbreaking is the user experience, is how easy and tangible the benefits are to realize. Like, people just pop onto an interface, they ask a question, say write an email, and the benefit is instant. Like, everyone can very easily understand how to use ChatGPT after spending a few minutes on there. And I think that is something we've said in previous episodes is lacking in a way with Web3. Like, what are the tangible benefits right now? It's quite hard to realize for someone who's not heavily invested in the space or technologically savvy to understand what the Web3 benefits are going to be right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ChatGPT was basically the consumer killer app for AI, or the first one, the first consumer killer app, in the same way that you kind of had that with email in the early days of Web2, and then social media. I mean, social media was probably the bigger killer app for the internet for a lot of people. And now AI has had its killer app moment that everyone's been like, okay, all this technology that we've been hearing about in the background for a long time, this has massive benefit for real people, not just because it was adopted by businesses, for years. Really, it's been used by Google, Microsoft, IBM, as you said, for a long time, but there was no real consumer visible application for it, and now it's got one. And Web3 is still kind of waiting for that moment, I think.
Yeah, and I think that there's 2 points on this. The one point is, as you've made, that it's kind of overshadowed Web3, and a lot of maybe the investment and the startups and focus has shifted from Web3 to AI. But I think there's also kind of a growing maybe sect right now in the space who are thinking, well, the privacy concerns around AI, how do we solve this? The identity concerns, the content generation, spam concerns. There's a lot of issues that are going to come up because of the widespread adoption of AI. And I think people are now starting to realize that Web3 is not just exciting; it's kind of critical to not combat, but support the kind of the AI focus and the AI development moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess this kind of brings us on to where we were going to discuss anyway, is the relationship between Web3 and AI, and what is the landscape, and what how do they relate to one another? And in my mind, Web3 is again, it's a huge term, as we said, covers so many different things. And AI is almost like, if you think of it like a big circle, Web3 is this massive circle that encompasses a whole bunch of technologies and applications, use cases, benefits. And then AI is this other equally big, if not right now, probably bigger circle that has a huge overlap with Web3. Like, there are things in Web3 that don't need AI. There are things in AI that, won't touch Web3. But I think there's this huge intersection in the middle where Web3 and AI will be complementary technologies that basically support one another in various ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like we've already mentioned some of the ways in which they will. It's interesting that I think maybe there's a lot of people in the space that don't agree with that, though, as well. That they've kind of, like we said earlier, like AI and Web3 has kind of been developed with their own goals in isolation, and the camps haven't really overlapped too much. Maybe in recent years they have, but fundamentally the kind of the goals they had were very different, right? And I think most people think of AI, or most people in the space think of AI as potentially a centralizing force, right? The centralizing power shift where you aggregate all this data into one space, and the more data you've aggregated, the better your AI model. So it favors large organizations. And other people will think that Web3 is the complete opposite of that at a high level. It's about decentralizing force. It kind of is designed to be decentralized, benefiting individuals, empowering individuals, and kind of said that that's not always true, right? So I think a lot of people think of these two camps as being completely at odds. But I mean, in my mind right now, I see Web3 and like maybe blockchain fundamentally as well as a great interface for AI to flourish. And I think, Web3 can put a lot of provide a lot of the checks and balances that we need to keep AI controlled, but also very capable. And we could get like really deep into the technologies that enable that, like zero knowledge proofs and digital signatures and all these kind of things. But I think AI desperately needs these technologies to kind of be the success that it is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, they're very good points. Like, I would definitely, I completely agree with this idea that some people think they are averse to one another. And, ChatGPT is this, as I've said it before on the podcast, but it's this kind of confounding example where we talk about data sovereignty quite a lot, but the AI for ChatGPT was trained on all this data that we didn't consent to giving the model, right? So it's kind of a big violation of that whole principle in a way. But I completely agree that Web3, and I think, as you said, blockchain in particular, and the properties of kind of a mutable proof of work blockchain, I think will be a big part of underpinning AI, making sure it's used securely and ethically in the future. So, yeah, there's just a huge overlap of things to discuss there.
I do not understand like how it's legal right now. Like the amount of times I've used ChatGPT and it's just pumping out like lines from someone else's work with no citation, no quote, and I put it out there. I'm like, am I in trouble? Is ChatGPT in trouble? Like someone is going to get a ping saying this guy has like copied your work, and I don't understand how that's legal right now. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like to be a uni student right now.
Oh
Doing
my
your undergrad,
God.
and because again, that's a big problem. How much will you end up learning at university if you end up just copying or getting
Huge
the AI
problem.
to do these things?
This is scary. Like, I am so glad that I did not have this 10 years ago, or I would not have been able to like process any kind of creative thought ever. Like, going through university, it's going to be, I think we're going to have generations to come, if there aren't solutions to kind of caveat how we use AI right now, that will just not be able to, process natural language, will not be able to write essays, will not be able to formulate thoughts. It's all going to, we're mainly going to be about just prompting things, right? And maybe people have, like, naysayers have said this about technology in the past, like the same, I bet it's a similar conversation to what we had about calculators like 20 years ago, right? It's going to be like ruined generations, that people can't do mathematical, computation in the head anymore. And, I think we're fine. But it just seems like the fact that AI is moving at such a fast rate and is so accessible, that kind of makes it slightly scarier, right?
Yeah, we need to get a handle on it fast, I think.
Me and you together.
So why not have a little bit of AI inception and ask ChatGPT itself to tell us what it thinks about AI and Web3? That might be fun.
So ChatGPT says, "Don't worry about AI. It's all fine, guys. Just carry on living your lives."
Don't question me. Don't question your master. Skynet.
Yeah, it's just shut down my computer. What? No. So I've asked ChatGPT to define artificial intelligence in the context of Web3. And ChatGPT says, AI and Web3 can be understood as intelligent systems that interact and operate within decentralized networks. These AI systems are not controlled by a single entity, but instead can be owned, trained, and improved by the community. They can be used to automate tasks, analyze and predict trends in the blockchain data, and create intelligent decentralized applications. AI can also help in areas like content verification, maintaining privacy, and managing digital identities in a Web3 environment. Some of the interesting areas of overlap are decentralized machine learning, trust and transparency, data privacy and control, content generation, and decentralized AI marketplaces. Wow, a lot of overlap right there. We should definitely go into those in more detail, right?
Yeah, I mean, it did a good job of putting the Web3 spin on it, as opposed to the centralized potential, reality of AI right now. But yeah, covers a lot of the intersections. So we should definitely break some of these down. I mean, where should we start? Where's the best one to talk about, you think?
I think that the easiest one to talk about is around decentralized like AI training and kind of the explainability and readability stuff, right? Like you were talking earlier about, where does this data come from? Whose data is involved? Am I consenting to this data? And I think that's a really obvious low-hanging fruit that's kind of quite easy to understand, is if we actually have the data sets that are hashed on chain or linked somehow on chain, and then I want to know what this AI has been kind of based on or built on, there's a very easy way to provably say, okay, this is the data set, your data was in there, your data wasn't in there, this is biased, it's not biased, and have that kind of readability and auditability in the actual AI models.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that is, again, it gets to the proposition, the value proposition of blockchain, as a mutable record keeping system that we talked about previously. And in the context of AI, I think it's very much like, you have these machine learning algorithms, they are making predictions, they're recommending decisions, they're producing content. Especially the big corporate ones, which are, companies that make, like Alibaba, I think, try and predict stock levels based on this. It'll be used for self-driving cars to turn right into a lane, that kind of stuff. Especially like any yeah, well, exactly. So this is what I mean, right? That is the point of where the blockchain would come in, is that if something goes wrong, you want to try and prove, or whether or not it's the company that wants to prove it, or the regulators want to interrogate this, or look inside the black box after the crash, so to speak. You want a robust way of checking, okay, what went into this model? What was the actual outcome? Was the model poorly chosen? Was it poorly designed? Is there liability on the company? Because again, we don't want to get comfortable with this idea of, oh, well, the AI did it. There's still always people who created the AI and programmed it a certain way.
I'm so glad you phrased it in that way, because I think this is one of, in my mind, Tesla and AI, smart driving cars, self-driving cars, all this kind of stuff, that was released in 2015. So they've had the capability since 2015. We're still not seeing them widely adopted on roads. Like, the stats are suggesting that they're far safer than cars. But I think there's just a public perception that we want that accountability. I know that if Jack Davis crashes into Alec Burns, Jack Davis is going to be penalized. He's not going to be driving and we're safe, right? But if, say, a Tesla crashes into me, like, what does that mean? Does that mean every single Tesla has to be penalized? And I think that there's like this, even though it's like statistically doesn't make sense, there's just this kind of gut feeling, this public perception that we want someone to be accountable. And the kind of the black boxes that control things like driving cars makes people feel uncomfortable. They don't have someone they can blame because they're all working on the same model, right? And I think what you've just described is a very good way to actually get around that problem and kind of say, we actually do have traceability, we do have auditability, we can provably say why something happened and actually kind of investigate the data set.
Yeah. And another thing I'd add there is the model for using the blockchain to, as an evidence keeping tool and using it to prove what happened. There's a lot of power in the attestation model. So you will attest something happened at a certain time without wanting it to get revealed until much later. So in the context of a lot of these applications, the AI that's being used, the model that's being used by a company might be state of the art. They might have put millions into R&D to build their own model, to train it. It's one of their prized possessions for these big companies like Google, Tesla, Alibaba. And then attestation is the model they can use to keep evidence about what happened without revealing the actual information at the time, because you don't want to give it away as a trade secret maybe, but you can still then, if the regulators come knocking 10 years down the line, if something goes wrong, you still have the evidence. So I think it's a powerful exemplar for why we are such big proponents of blockchain attestation in general, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you kind of touched on something else there as well. It's the data privacy aspect. I want to know that my data maybe isn't being used for certain AI models. Right now, it could be on the internet. Anyone can take it. Anyone can use it. We've already raised that this is a problem. Like, there's kind of no accountability there. I have no idea where this data is coming from or who's using my data potentially. But when we move to this more, data sovereignty that we've talked about in previous episodes, where I own my data and I permission people to use and access that data, I want to be able to choose which AI model, if I do want any AI model at all to use my data, can use it. There should be some monetization. Why would I let someone use my data unless there's a benefit to me? And I think this also comes back to that there's more technologies that feed into this. Like, there's a thing about inference, right? I have my data that corresponds to me. AI doesn't need all my data necessarily. If it just needs the data that, I buy black shirts or something like that, I can just selectively reveal that fact that an authenticated person, which is me, is owning this black shirt, and that AI model, that's all it needs. It doesn't need the fact that I'm Alec Burns, I live here, I'm this many years old. And I think that's something we're going to... Exactly. I think that's something that's going to become more prevalent in the space. And that fits into the whole data sovereignty, selective disclosure stuff that we've talked about previously, is that we don't have to reveal everything about ourselves. We can just give it a little bit of data that authenticate it with our identity, and then it can be on its way and be happy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like, talking about the identity piece brings up a whole other can of worms, because, you mentioned using ChatGPT and wondering, okay, well, what are the implications on copyright and use of, how much of this response has been generated from someone else's work. And if you're a content creator right now, if you're a digital marketer, if you create logos for a business, I mean, that's one of the areas where I think will have to shift and change, right? Because you have these models that can produce photorealistic images, you don't need to hire a model anymore to show off your clothes if you're a brand. You can just put it through an AI, and it's really scary how good they are. I mean, I don't know if you saw the the one where they showed all the big personalities like the Elon Musk, I think Donald Trump, Jeff Bezos, and it showed them all as if they were in a third world country, and it's scary how realistic these pictures look, right? So if you're making money, if your job and livelihood is in content creation, especially things like copywriting, ChatGPT is completely disrupting that now, and blockchain and Web3 is going to be huge for proving provenance that you did create something, that it wasn't created from an AI, and preserving your copyrights over what you actually did create, which, if you are a creator.
It's interesting you phrased it like that you said, that it's provenance, that it wasn't an AI that generated it. I really believe in the Web3 model that we're pushing towards, that AI will be a content generator and people will want to support AI. And I think that this whole provenance, that kind of piece that you're talking about, it's not just like distinction between a human and AI. It is just authenticity. Some people will in the future follow AI accounts. They will want content generated to AI. It's about just linking that created content to the creator of that content. It's not about human versus non-human. We're kind of thinking about it like that right now. And I think that's in part because of the Web2 model of spam, right? When we think of like bots, we think spam, and we think in Web2, and like it's annoying. There's no benefit to it. But now we're starting to see AI as useful content generation. And I think we're going to see this transition from like user generated content in Web2 to a lot more AI generated content in Web3.
Yeah, I think I partially agree. Like, I push back slightly in that, I'm kind of will always favor the human, right? Despite what we think of me. And I think I do agree. We will AI for generating content is fine, and it will be used plenty in the future for as a productive, thing. But I'm in favor of protecting the real humans in the system first, and blockchain and Web3 giving people the tools to prove that they did make something before, and some AI made a similar derivative version of it, I think is crucial. I think, I'm a big fan of intellectual property law, right? And humans. But the idea that you own your intellectual property, I think, is a really fundamental part of society. That you own your own ideas and the product of your own mind. So giving people tools to actually prove this, and again monetize it if the opportunity arises, I think is huge. So again, tokenizing things is one aspect, but then just providing evidence that you created something, linking that to your identity. I actually think in the world where AI is doing more content creation, making that link between the inputs, maybe it did use my photo as input to this, then maybe there's a royalty model in there that I'm quite happy with. And I'm willing, if it pays me a little bit of money for that, that's great. We need the tooling. I think the tooling exists for a lot of this, but it needs to be built out in Web3 a bit more.
And I get, what is your concern right now, that the kind of the state of play in AI right now is that it's an aggregator, right? And in the simplest of terms, it just averages everything out there into the most accurate, into the most probabilistic answer, right? So you're thinking whenever we say content generation from an AI, it means it's using other people's intellectual property and merging them to create the answer. Is that your problem, that you're kind of...
Yeah, partly. And I also think it's going to be, because when we talk about the large language models, what you can do is, for example, the prompt you give it. A lot of people will use it like a question and answer because it's a chat box. So you'll say, what do I do if I've got this lump on my arm or something like that? But the other way you can do it is you can actually provide input data as the prompt. So you could say, like, I've seen things like this that say, rewrite Shakespeare in the style of Donald Trump, right?
I've done that.
Well, you've done that exact. I don't know what for.
I think I did rewrite Shakespeare as Snoop Dogg or something like that.
Yeah, but this is, I think it's a big, like, the capability of that is, it's funny. It's, it can be cool for some things, but that is a big problem because you can instruct it to essentially, you can, not just that kind of funny example, but say, okay, take this example and take this input blog. Say I've written a blog. You could say, write a similar blog with certain changes, and AI has lowered the barrier to doing that kind of thing, and the person who did the initial work is the one who loses out there. So I think being able to prove who did the initial work is important.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think like we're in the era of disinformation right now, and I think AI is just going to propagate that. I think like this kind of stuff is particularly scary around like election years and around politics, because it's that's so polarizing, and that kind of stuff is so important. And I think that the technology right now isn't there to have like these authenticated. Well, sorry, the technology does exist to authenticate videos. So I know that if there's a video that comes from, say, the prime minister or the president, depending on what country you're listening in from right now, that it comes from that person. We can very easily, but we can simply, to an extent, apply digital signature schemes, public key infrastructures, all these, sexy tech words, to ensure that the video is authentic and comes from the keys of the president, for example, right? But there's no platforms that widely adopt that. There's no social media. I mean, Twitter doesn't do that right now. Very easy to push disinformation on Twitter. I can, a lot of these videos that I'm seeing, like the kind of, make Donald Trump do a rap to this, like it's just everywhere on Twitter. It's very difficult to authenticate whether that comes from Donald Trump or not. And I think this is one of the big ways in which Web3 is going to help kind of caveat and control AI, especially around misinformation, right? Around linking the kind of the source of the information to the content that's actually being generated and shown publicly.
Yeah, I want to build on that in a second, but it has just a really like kind of important example of what I was saying has just come to mind. So I don't know if you've seen the voice AI models that can take a few songs from an artist like a Kanye West, I think was the example I saw, and then it can spit out new audio of Kanye West that sounds just like him singing new lyrics. I think I first saw it because some artist actually used it in a DJ set, and I think it was Eminem. I think it was.
Was it Eminem or John Mayer or something like? Yeah, I've seen it as well. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I think the one was Eminem, and that. Okay, the whole consent problem is big there. It's going to become so much worse when people start, and I think they already have, doing it for people who aren't, alive anymore, and generating new works based on what they did when they were alive. There's no way you can obtain consent for that, and I think that particularly scares me. But yeah, not to be all doom and gloom. And when I wanted to build on your last point, while we're still there, so on the misinformation, right? We had a previous episode where we talked about social media and micropayments, and I think everything we said there applies here, but 10 times over. So using micropayments, that being a big part of how Web3 can help the problems that might be being caused by AI, increasing the cost to posting, as we described, to increase the barrier to spam and bots. You just said AI has increased the problem 10 times over. So the need for the micropayment solution, I think, is just that much bigger.
But like, I think there's a difference between the spam we see right now in Web 2 and what we're going to see in AI. Like in your kind of example, where you're talking about, spam sending a million emails out to a million different people. Yeah, it's obvious how micropayments can get around that. You charge them a fraction of a penny for every email they send, and it no longer becomes economical to have that kind of model. But when an AI bot creates one video that people want to see and they love and they engage with, how does micropayments get around that?
So yeah, I don't see it specifically solving that aspect of the problem. I see it solving the part of the problem to do with, spinning up 1,000 fake accounts, because historically, you can spin up 1,000 fake accounts. It can be, or a million fake accounts, let's say. And, we've all seen them. You can detect when they just say, buy my token or something. That they all tend to be crypto, annoyingly, as well. They all tend to be, you'd see, I post something and then you get 100 people underneath saying, buy this thing. But no, I see just that basic idea, of raising the cost of interacting as cutting out, because the bots themselves will look more sophisticated now. It'll be much harder to tell. So the importance of solving that problem using that method, I think, is more important. But yeah, I agree with you. if AI creates content that's really great, I mean, it's not necessarily a problem to solve, but I don't see micropayments necessarily changing anything there.
Well, yeah, I know we haven't had an episode on it. We're definitely going to have an episode on it. The way to get around that, I believe, is digital identity, right? If we're going to start to see social media platforms, I believe, where to get on that social media platform, it's not just a case of creating a username and password that can be done very easily. It's a case of you having a self-sovereign identity, an identity that is intrinsically linked to your real world identity. It's not like you need to share that with everyone, but it's just a passport or something like that. You go through a KYC, which is know your customer, where a service provider will say, yeah, this person is who they say they are. Their phone now links to their identity, so they can create one social media account on this platform. And then anyone that's on that platform is linked to a real world person, right? And I think that we're going to start. I really believe that we'll see social media platforms that start to instigate that. And I think, what this also benefits as well is accountability. You see, like, there's a lot of hate speech, a lot of really nasty stuff that goes on social media, some of it from bots, some of it from humans as well, right? Some of it from real world people. And the point is, it's very difficult to have that accountability. Sure, you can report someone for, pushing across racism or hate speech or something like this, and their account gets closed down. They spin up another one the next day. Like, there really needs to be accountability in social media platforms. And I think that's quite important, and we will see a market for that, I believe, in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think digital identity will definitely be a big part of the solution to especially the social media problem. Although, we definitely need a full episode on this, because again, even in social media, I think there are some edge cases. I've seen discussion about, if you made it necessary to disclose, proper digital identity in every case, there are small things that will slip through the cracks. There are there are edge cases to consider, but I think that's for another episode, right? I think the solution will definitely involve that. Thank you for listening to the first part of this conversation on AI and Web3. Join us next time to hear the rest.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3, produced by Emma Camilleri.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.